How are you? Let's make sure first everyone's microphone is working. No excuses today. Everyone? Yeah, it looks like it's great. Let me put it this way. In a conference like this, we are in a privileged and lucky position where we have an audience of experts, which effectively means, for us, no fluff, no generalities, no pleasantries, direct, blunt, straightforward conversation. That's what this audience might be hoping for. So may we start with the perhaps most fundamental question of all. Where do we stand now, today, in the biotech sphere in Europe? Is there a clear trend? Because we've heard some optimism from Claire, but is it pure optimism, or are there major stumbling blocks, or is there a diagnosis you would like to start with, perhaps? Anyone?
I can certainly start, so welcome everyone, thank you for the invitation. So Europe's biotech is growing annually, however, we are losing the ground globally. So at the same time, we can see that the gap between Europe and the United States is widening. And there are several reasons for that. However, also from our perspective, maybe clinical trials are not falling squarely into biotech trends, but certainly the trends that we can see in clinical trials can transfer into what's going to happen in biotech. And a decade ago, Europe was responsible for 25% of the global clinical trials. Right now, a decade later, it's around 19%. And we're losing to Asia, mostly China, due to the much more favorable regulatory landscape, especially in the area of early phase and gene and cell therapies. So certainly something that we can do as a Europe. We need to look into the regulatory landscape, but I understand that this will be a matter of the discussion in the later phases, so I can leave the recipes for later on.
Ireneusz, I could see Claire was nodding, listening to you, because you said something really interesting. On the one hand, we see that the gap is widening, but at the same time, what is potentially making the industry a little bit complacent is the fact that it's experiencing growth and generally positive news. But the latter half, the gap is widening, is not a promising part of the message, is it? Claire, I'm almost forcing you to say something pessimistic. Beware.
No, it's really true. You cannot argue with these statistics. And Europe, despite it's amazing, it has grown, but compared to other regions of the world, it needs to understand where it sits in the race. So 5% faster in Europe, but if China is 25% faster, that's not winning. But and a lot of our challenges we make ourselves in terms of the challenges of bringing things to market. So you won't have so many clinical trials here if it's not so easy to bring a medicine to market here. Why would you do a clinical trial in a country or a region where you're not intending to go to market? And then when you get to the clinical trial, the member state requirements across 27 different countries still create a very fragmented pathway. So a lot of these things are within our hands to solve. I think there's a lot more awareness of these challenges now. Some things need to improve at the general pharmaceutical legislation in terms of market creation, and other things I think the Commission and Member States are very aware where some of the logistical challenges are, the frictions in the system that they are bringing. So we have these few years to try and really improve this.
Anyone else would like to comment on that?
Maybe I would like to add that the US biotech market is for sure the leader, the worldwide leader in the biotech itself. But Europe, it has great potential in terms of R&D, but maybe it's not that well equipped with the commercialization tools. And this is something we should be focusing at for the next years. And this is, let's say, my point of view at this conversation. So we need to focus on the commercialization, the reindustrialization. This is something very popular right now, not only in the biotech, but in general the pharmaceutical industry and other part of the economy.
Thank you.
I can add one more issue here. We are acting like 27 countries in European Union, separately, let's say, or any country has its own, let's say, goals and aims in this race. And finally, unfortunately, European Union see that this is a big problem. To compete with the United States and China and the rest of the world, we need to have a common strategy for life sciences generally and for biotech as well, and for pharmaceutical industry, of course, as well. And now we have some vision how European Union wants to deal with that issue. So we have named some problems and some challenges we are going to face in next years. It's defined at the level of competitiveness compass, for example, with the following documents. So fortunately, we see the path. We see how we can, let's say, challenge these problems that were already named. But of course, from the level of strategic documents to the actions is a long way, and that's a problem for.
Let me challenge you a little on that. Every time you hear a phrase like common strategy and you talk about minimum 27 players, plus all those university and research hubs scattered all around Europe. EuropaBio is providing a lot of interesting insights, trying to explain where all the funding is going and what the correlation between research hubs and academic centers is, and the actual impact on whether it's local GDP or earning income, whatever parameters you take. So is it really a question of, because common strategy, the problem with common strategies Europe-wide is it takes years to build one, by which time they become outdated and everyone is already past your achievement. So definitely some agility is there, and definitely, need for agility, another popular buzzword. But let's try and perhaps break it up into something more tangible, actionable, what is missing in this equation. Salem, can I come back to you for a while? The question was, is there a clear trend? Where are we today? Is there a clear trend or a clear concern? Because it's already been mentioned, we were talking about the gap, the widening gap between Europe and beyond, and at the same time, the satisfaction of experiencing continuous growth, which makes us potentially a little complacent.
Yeah, it's an interesting, combination of trends there. Sorry, I missed actually the first part of the question. Just want to make sure.
The simple idea is, where are we today? Because you yourself mentioned that 50 years is a hell of a perspective, but now you're talking about much shorter prospects. So where are we today, and what should we be expecting? Like the biggest stumbling blocks, perhaps?
Yeah, I think many of them have been already mentioned, right? It's we're missing a little bit of agility in the European space. It's awesome.
A little bit.
I do like, exaggerations, as you can hear. It's highly fragmented. It's actually therefore pretty surprising to me, in a positive way, to see the European data of production actually this morning. That's why I think we need to speak more about that, show these trends that despite the fragmentation, there's actually a lot that is being achieved. And projecting this out, probably, that will be the optimistic incentive that could help us drive these things forward, because despite all of this, we're being so productive. So what could we do actually to be more agile, right? We would see potential significant jumps there. And then another thought that came into my mind when I was listening to the discussion was probably we should also activate more of these. There's a lot of players in terms of venture capital, and probably maybe we need to consolidate these even further. I was having some very interesting discussions with Alex just 5 minutes before regarding the Polish capital venture space, etc. So probably we should try to combine more of these regional ones into even larger ones, European ones, show some more union even on that side too, which I do know exists, but Probably there's more that we can combine forces there. And then I was already thinking to potential, who else could be sitting here in the next years. There is a couple of large venture capitalist players in the European market. And again, you know, with my background mainly coming from Qiagen, there's one name that comes into my mind, which is the ex-CEO from Qiagen. His name is Per Schatz. He has been actually one of the drivers of investments into European biotech. So that's probably not very well known, but one of the larger investments from his time after Qiagen is spatial spatial genomics, spatial transcriptomics technology provider in Germany, and him, you know, being actually quite fluent in the global space, deliberately choosing Germany as the headquarters of that technology company, and actually in totality in Series A and B they managed to cumulatively add together $100 million, $97 million actually in terms of, or euros in this case, in terms of revenue, in terms of investment. Anyway, if we would activate these sort of players even more, you know, centralized, right, as a central European, you know, union, hopefully we would be able to instill much more of this agility, and then coming back, also positively incentivize everyone that, hey, look at this productivity that we're having despite all of the fragmentation, and now think about what we could actually achieve if, you know, we would become a little more agile.
Something what you've just said reminds me of another statistic I read about from EuropaBio sources, is that, is it a stereotype that European investors, generally VC, is more on the conservative side in Europe compared to the US, to put it gently?
As I said before, I'm a huge fan of exaggerations, right? So even, you can hear it in my speech as well. I usually try to tone it down too. So every time when I'm speaking to actually, you know, even, because I'm born and raised actually in Germany, so there's a lot of European influence that I have been having. So yeah, the answer is we're way too, how would you say, way too underselling actually the capabilities. And yeah, going to the statistics from this morning that nobody, that I didn't know about, how productive we actually are, etc. And you know, nothing against our US colleagues, there's a lot that we can learn there, but I think they're very often overselling, obviously, what they, you know, so as so often the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle.
Thank you, Salim. So, that was the first and the last easy question. Let's raise the bar a little higher. Tell me, is Europe's biotech suffering from inferiority complex, superiority complex, or both? How would you describe it?
In the science or the industry?
I don't think there's that much problem on the science side. I think it's more of a commercialization side, isn't there? But it's up to you to answer that. What would you say? Oh, there's no problem at all. That's also
So maybe I can start and then everybody else can comment. So I think we do have inferiority component, just like it was told a second ago. We have a strong science. Things that we lack is probably the transfer from the idea to the commercialization in the market. And I think the main problem here is to secure sufficient funding, especially in the late stage development of the technology. I think we are quite good in Europe in getting the seed funds. However, later on, it's much more difficult. And when you see the perspective, the success breeds the confidence. And if we look that the American companies are growing larger, especially when we compare our European companies, that not that many unicorns, for example. Certainly, conversely, it's building lack of confidence, therefore inferiority complex. But I think we've got assets that we can develop. We need the unity. Okay, again, I'm engaging in the discussion of the recipes, but I think certainly there is an inferiority complex that we can see.
So tell me, is it a question of European investors being a little bit on the stingy conservative side, or is it a question of American biotech being simply a lot better at the sales and persuasion game?
I think it's a systemic issue because when you again see the 27 countries fragmented markets, so the investors know that if they invest something in States, it goes into the market, one huge market with one FDA agency. Whereas in Europe, you have fragmented, so we have 27 regulatory authorities. Of course, you've got EMA, however, still a lot of things like technology assessment, pricing, reimbursement, it takes time. So usually the technology is implemented in Europe within 1 year delay in comparison to the United States. So that's why when you're an investor, you see these trends. I think you're more likely to invest in States if you have those two regions to be chosen.
Interesting. Thank you. Claire?
Yeah, this is something we cover all the time because it's what we need to see is how quickly you can grow to scale and grow to market, because the more clear the pathway is towards that, because a lot of our members bake in increased costs and a bit of increased time within Europe, but the killer is the lack of transparency. So every time you say to an investor, I don't know, in the answer to their question, they'll move a step further away from investing to you. And so I think this is what Europe really has to overcome in many ways, and it's not just in healthcare, it's also within industrial biotechnology if you have to go through EFSA, for example. So Europe needs to look at the points that say, where can't we answer this question clearly, and where does it then become too much of a time and cost added to make this a valuable investment? Because no investor is going to invest if they can't get their money back within a reasonable period of time.
So it is a persuasion and sales game to a large extent as well, if there is such a significant difference between the approach of American VCs versus European VCs. Is this an important component? Because there is some kind of blame game going on, isn't there? In the sense of whether you have enough funding, whether enough priority is given to biotech at EU, at European Commission level, let's say.
I think it's a combination of things. I wouldn't say it's a blame game per se. I would say you can't point at one thing and say this is the reason why this isn't here. And a lot of VC scale is linked to the fact that it's slower to market. I've got a fragmented market. If you can open up the markets and expand the critical mass of the market, you will get higher VC in Europe. I think a lot of companies are waiting to invest, because we're talking about VC into small companies, but large companies are waiting to invest internal funds into new products as well, and that's the same discussion they will have. So I think opening up the little points all along the way to market will make a huge difference to how much VC is committed and the scale at which it is committed early.
But also the business model is completely different.
If we could ask our technical team to provide a microphone to whoever wants to contribute at any point, we are free to that. Enjoy. You need to press the button on the microphone, I suppose. It needs to turn red on the side of the microphone, close to the top. Oh, it's green.
So, okay. So I guess the business model for a small company or a biotech company and a VC is completely different. A VC has a fund, invest in 20 companies, and if 3 of them are successful, then the fund is successful. What I always care about is those 17 other companies. If you are the CEO or the CSO of such a company, then you are in really, really big problems. So instead of making their business model as good as possible, I think there should be very much more effort if they invest to support those companies and not be in a way to invest to get most of the shares for the lowest price. This is
fair enough. But let's go back to perhaps to the second question second chapter in our conversation. You remember the famous quote from Kennedy, who said, "Ask not what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." We all know the statistics from the startup world and what a small percentage of those startups are actually successful in the market. I suppose that's part of the evolution. Similarly, with your VC analogy of 3 companies out of 20 being successful and 17 not getting the money or enough money to succeed with their ideas. So essentially it's a question of perspective, isn't it? That it's not only investors not being in the right mind to invest in those 17 companies, but perhaps there is something missing. So the question is, what should be the positive differentiator for those smaller 17 businesses in their startup stage to make them more successful? In other words, we are getting closer to the storytelling angle, sales angle in the biotech conversation, aren't we? Anyone would like to comment on the question perhaps as well?
I'll try. I'm not sure if I can comment both at the same, but I'll try. So, to go back to your original question, right, and actually also listening to this conversation, which you can hear immediately, what we tend to is differentiate things out, right? Let's look at the data. Let's, and it's great because it shows that we are much more from a mindset perspective, right, founded on differentiation and really have a foundational discussion that is based on as much data as possible, etc. Back to your question, I do think that clearly it is a sales philosophy, or what did you call it before? Also an inferiority kind of thing. Because if we would have this sort of discussion, by the way, in the US, for example, right, it would go slightly different. It would not necessarily immediately go into the differentiated space, right, but immediately actually into the value proposition. Very bold, very, we're going to change the world. There was some other things that were mentioned before, which I thought was very interesting, saying, what was it, success breeds confidence. It's actually the exact opposite, way. Again, that is probably being a little overdone in the US, that actually, confidence breeds success. And trying to answer then the second part of your question is how to set ourselves apart is maybe exactly in that, I'm going to call it a weakness now, which actually is a strength though, because if we would combine this sort of differentiated mind, which is highly needed anyway, especially in this high-tech space that we are in, right? So if we would combine that with an extra layer of sales confidence and the value proposition, and really strengthen that in combination with the scientific part, I think that can only be a winning combination actually going forward. So I think we just need to be much more bold, combined with that differential thinking. And I think with that I probably have answered more or commented more to yours than to your question.
But I completely agree. With modesty, nobody gets famous. So this is I'm from the Netherlands, working now for 5 years here in Poland, and this is what I tell my team all the time: get out there. Show what we do. The science is great, and it's not better in Western Europe and the US. Go out and tell the people what we can do.
Fully agree. Would it be, let me again try and raise the bar a little higher again. You mentioned it might be partly because of the inferiority complex, but would you agree that it's a little bit more dangerous when it's both inferiority and superiority complex combined, in the sense that Europe is definitely proud of its scientific and research heritage, at the same time is facing a reality where beyond the east and western borders of the continent, the dynamic is very different. And the readiness of those investors is also very different, which means the storytelling and the investment tradition is very different, because I'm sure we will agree that money is not really a problem in today's world, is it? I mean, there are lots and lots of huge investors who just want to put their money somewhere, but the persuasion game is, let's say, inadequate.
I would say that there is not so much investors, let's say, fully understanding the biotech market. So that's
there you have it.
That's the issue. So, of course, potentially there are a lot of sources on the market, and potential investors around. But if it comes to the biotech project, and they have to understand fully how the project looks like, what is a time frame for such project, where the risks are activated, it's not so easy to find this proper investor with smart money. So that's the issue we should, let's say, dig into and discuss, because potentially that's the major problem for this particular sector.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the key challenges from what you're telling me is that you're dealing with sophisticated cutting-edge science, which is kind of difficult sometimes to translate to simple money-oriented mindsets, or profit-oriented mindsets, and that's part of the challenge, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. This is my answer. Because for some investors, it could be the challenge to understand the business. But in general, my opinion is that the investors are looking for generating the cash flow earlier than the biotech offers. This is the problem.
So ROIC is kind of too long for them, right?
Yeah. The return of investments calculating in decades, it's not really a good deal nowadays, because you can make money faster, and this is a big issue.
So what you're facing is the kind of response, I could be dead by then, and that's why
You never know.
Yeah, and maybe to interact with Łukasz, I completely agree with him. You know, it's but what happens if you have a small company? People give you some seed money, the VCs. You get 2-3 million. You make a lab, you hire some people, and within 2 years it's gone. And then they come back and they tell you, yeah, Louis, you know, it's a little bit disappointing, and we do want to invest again, but we do that at a different valuation. The end is that they get all the shares, and that's not the most important. They get all the board seats, so they are trying to make the decisions, and then the decisions are not scientifically merit anymore. That's really the big problem. It's not about the money. It's about what I said earlier, the different business model. They are willing to give time away, to give more shares, so that for the 3 companies that are a success, they have a huge profit. So it's a different business model than people, the scientists, that want to make this company and these molecules into success to patients.
Thank you very much for that commentary, because, yeah, Claire?
I was going to say, that's a really good point, and I think a really good story that we like to think about is when you're looking at genuinely groundbreaking science, something that is going to go towards a novel therapy or something like this, that's different than a lot of the other innovations. Let's say Qiagen's innovations are great because they also accelerate the way that science progresses. It's a different way of innovating towards the medicine's impact. But if you look at the development of mRNA, that was going on commercially for a super long time before COVID came along. It was not intended for COVID.
Perfect acceleration.
There'd been commercial development for over 25 years linked to mRNA, and if COVID hadn't come, it would still be chugging along as a potential immuno-oncology intervention. So there's no guarantee that ever would have been successful if COVID hadn't come and put it in the spotlight. So it just shows there is an ongoing challenge with how you get groundbreaking science towards disease resolution or prevention, because it's challenging, because it could fail scientifically at any point. So if that's a slightly different conversation than other types of investment.
Fair enough. So let me, again, paraphrase and invite you for a while to the wishful thinking territory and ask you this. Is there anything that Europe's biotech should be doing a lot better, a lot more of, or very differently? In an ideal world. Anyone?
Okay, so
You're perfect.
I can start.
You're perfect.
I can start with, let's say, my personal field I'm working on. So the public funding issues. So again, I can imagine that in my perfect world,
With the public funding issues phrase, you can skip the issues part because you already know there will be issues.
Yeah, true. But okay, I can imagine that in a perfect world, we have a, let's say, again, I know that you don't like it, but some strategy behind it. So
I'm merely teasing you. So I do not like or dislike anything.
okay,
I'm just
at the level of European Union, we just named that the biotech is a crucial technology last year. So that was finally said that, okay, we should invest in biotech projects and they should have some priority and some funding should come for this project additionally on the top of regular, let's say, framework of public funding. So I can imagine that in a perfect future, or my imagination of perfect future, we have very strong fundament base at the level of European Union. Some sources at this level, and additionally some coherent system or coherent framework for member states. And supporting the same ideas and the same goals at the European level. So that's...
I know I asked for wishful thinking, but you're just giving me too much of it.
Okay, sorry about that.
Instead, let me ask you this. Is there anything...
But it's possible.
Yeah, it is. But the question I really want to ask you, with your experience, is if you had a decision power to change the reality in the biotech sphere in Europe, and you could change everything about it, what would be your number one priority? What would you do better, like actionably, operationally better?
In that very, let's say, narrow space I'm discussing right now, it's a special fund for that. So, named fund for biotech, because right now, what we are challenging and what we see, what is very, let's say, important from the perspective of countries like Poland and Central Eastern Europe is a problem of creating some tools and some frameworks that are not, let's say, open and available for our companies because they need to be funded by member states by their own. So as long as we don't have biotech in a priority in Poland, we don't have money to, let's say, inject to these instruments. So as long as we don't agree on a European level that it's a priority and we have to set some funds for that and distribute it to all Europe with some quotas for each member states, it wouldn't work.
Knowledgeable people from the industry would probably agree with you, all of them, 100%, that biotech should be a priority in Europe. Now let me ask you this, if you approached an average person in the street and asked them this question, can you give me one example of impactful or indeed any biotechnology in your everyday life? Give me one. How many people would answer this question with one example out of 100 people you approach in the streets of Warsaw? How many?
After COVID, it's easy, come on.
Seriously? Seriously? You think they can create the connection in their
And
minds?
also, do they have to? Because biotech fuels products. It doesn't necessarily work. This technology, this is what I buy into, rather than the thing that made me get better, or the thing that stopped me getting sick.
With all the work that the vaccine skeptics are doing for you internationally on Fox News and everywhere else, are you sure that your average person in the street is building this positive connection in their mind, that you're not trying to kill them with your secret?
So let me ask you a question. If you ask the same person about the military equipment, is he or she aware of the investment, of the necessity of that investment?
I would think it's a very different. I would think it's not an analogy, because with military equipment, it's very relatable and very easy to imagine the impact and understand the impact, even if they cannot quantify it. But with biotech, first of all, is it even important? Is it even important that people, like average citizen in the street, should understand anything about biotech for your leverage, for your political and funding leverage, if not for anything else?
As long as we have drugs in a drugstore, it's fine, but if we will miss it, for example, it's not about purely biotech, but pharma industry in general. So Right now, at the level of Critical Medicines Act, we are discussing the, let's say, dependencies on the active pharmaceutical ingredients and the let's say, drugs coming from China and India. And as long as you have these drugs on a shelf, it's fine. But in one moment, you can wake up and there will be no very basic drugs to cure very basic populations.
So what you're saying, it's only the sense of ultimate danger that wakes people up.
And that's the role of us, that's the role of politicians, to make people aware of that.
Or to scare people into
Or
compliance.
to scare people, yeah, at the end of the day.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anything biotech should be doing better, more of, differently?
I think, Łukasz, I completely agree. We should have special funds. But what
Łukasz, have you paid this gentleman to
you know what I'm afraid of is the experts that judge upon those programs. You know, these are all academic professors that don't have a clue about biotech development. I've seen so many academic professors that want to be in a spin-off, but then stay in the university and have do a CEO job for 1 day a week. That doesn't work. So if you have those funds, then you should have people that really can judge biotech projects and not academic experts coming from university that don't have too much to do and therefore judge upon those programs.
Exactly. The notion of stakeholders in this game, you know, we've had issues with commercialization, the meeting point between science and the market. I mean, those two worlds up until today speak very different languages without even realizing that, don't they? So anyone else would like to comment on anything else that the industry should be doing differently in Europe?
I have another sister, but I'll keep it real quick, I promise. I think when you talk about the great groundbreaking science, it also needs to go hand in hand with the regulatory sandboxes, the market sandboxes, because until somebody is able to take your medicine, you might as well not exist. So it's incredibly important that the science is always excellent, because that's 100% has to be in the room, but it also, you have to understand how it is going to get to market, because there are more things that will stop it getting to market than the science itself.
And I'll try to build on that. It's super interesting to listen to, again, you know, the discussion and the conversation. And back to your question, if there was one thing that I would put on my wish list on the top, after thinking of it and listening to all of that, I would like thinking in whatever, in spectrums, you know, what we have under control, what we don't have under control. I would obviously pick the one that is far on the side that we not necessarily have in our control, and that goes back to the regulations. Because yeah, you made a very good point that biotech innovation and then the pharmaceutical innovation is different in terms of the permeability, is that a word? And the velocity that the actual innovation can hit that space. So I'd actually address that if I would have that on my priority list and would wish for lower regulatory hurdles for innovation in both spaces, and especially the pharmaceutical space, and then sort of harmonized at least for the European Union. So that would be wish list point number one. And then going back to the spectrum, all of the other stuff, I think we have a lot of these things under our control, and we're doing a better and better job by actually forums like this too, right? Like the discussions that we're having right now should be doubled down on, maybe together even with politicians and actually the larger investment funds across Europe, and unite those. And then I'll try to actually summarize this with all of the other stuff that we're discussing as well. Combine that as well with being a little more bold. Like our differentiation in terms of the potential that we have in our minds and our thinking of is great. Combining this with being more bold, and combining this at the same time, because you brought up another very important point, being humble regarding the past. We have a humongous inheritance in Europe, and yes, you're right, that should not make us complacent. It's actually the opposite. It should really give us the urgency, right, to build on that. Because yes, the last 10, 20, whatever years, we probably haven't been great at delivering on that inheritance, right? That the European science space has actually. So
hard to disagree with that. I'm glad to see that Ireneusz is raising his microphone, indicating he wants to speak.
What's not us? I think the answer would be you need to make, so the biotech needs to make the politicians aware that the biotech sector is that important. So
How?
you need to make it that if they don't make it
How?
important,
Ireneusz,
if it's not on the
how would you do
agenda,
it?
that they will lose the next election. And I think that's the
Oh, that will never
very
happen.
complex
That will never happen.
solution.
So second best
So you need
solution.
to communicate to the public why is it important. You can use the mass media.
That's the big
You
question.
can use
How
the-
would you do it?
I'll try to help you. Well, if I may, the data that we have seen this morning, I think is great, especially for the European public and for politicians as well. The productivity that this industry brings, right, and then probably dangling the carrot on top of that, that if they help us actually decrease the regulations and whatnot, what we could do in that space, right, and that will mean a lot of jobs, that would mean a lot of prosperity. And sorry for interrupting.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ireneusz, you would like to add on that?
No, I fully agree. Well, whatever you communicate, it needs to be targeted. You need to use the most sophisticated tools because that's why you compare. You compare with different businesses. You compare.
Seriously? Salim used the example of politics that he generally likes to avoid, classic risk manager approach. So let me ask you this. Even if politicians understand that in order to win the game, they need to suddenly appear on a TikTok account, they need to suddenly talk to podcasters, they need to change their entire mindset about spreading the story and communication game, adapt, be agile effectively. They understand that. With an industry like yours, hugely impressive, groundbreaking, pioneering, life-changing in a way, hence Interstellar as a reference. What is missing in how you talk to and who you talk to?
Perfectly goes back to the point from the very beginning, which is, are we underselling? Could we be better in actually having a value proposition that is bold? I think as simple as it sounds, it all goes down to communication, actually. How we make the point in a very compelling fashion. And there, again, I think we can learn quite a bit there from the US, for example. So, I don't know, I don't want to make it too simple to just go back to point one, but...
Kamil has been thinking heavily around all these issues, I'm sure.
Yes, what I'm thinking is, because I come from pharmaceutical industry, straight from the biotech, what is a very hot topic nowadays is Critical Medicines Act and all around it. And I think that what is missing to the biotech, that very significant event like COVID, because why Critical Medicines Alliance and after that Critical Medicines Act, Critical Medicines Union list became so popular because of the drug shortages. So people get aware what's going on. And maybe this is the missing point here.
That's interesting. What you've just said, correct me if I'm wrong again, is that the industry needs a catalyst, preferably a really powerful one, like a black swan.
Yeah, I think so. Because,
Otherwise, you will not be able to change anything in the industry.
otherwise it will take a longer time.
But let's face it, is lung cancer not enough? Or pancreatic cancer? We talk about COVID when people died, and I never understood that, why COVID got such a huge attention. Because that means that the life of a COVID patient is different than the life of a lung cancer patient or a pancreatic cancer patient. We still have all those problems. And that's how we should relate to problems. You asked how we can relate to the public. Cancer is a big problem. Immunotherapy has solved that for a lot of patients. That's what the public should know. And not tell them about military and about politics. This is disease, and this is what we do for patients. And I think here in the audience, people should be proud on what they do every day, because that's what we do. We try to make the life of patients and the families better.
Thank you very much. You've touched on a very important point, because that's essentially also a point around what this industry is driven by and defined by? Is it defined in the eyes of the general public by the money it wants to make? Or is it defined by understanding the ethical, disease, population priorities, or existential priorities?
I think Europe's weakness in the past has been to have that as a separate conversation, because on one side you will have a lot of policymakers going, we're here for the patients, we're here for this is everything, and there's never any talk about it, the huge economic model that sits underneath that. And so you get into a position where you have to say, we want these groundbreaking things, but we want to pay you much less than it costs you to afford development over a 20-year period. Because Europe doesn't connect the science, the impact on patients, with the huge business model that underpins it. And I think the US does do that, if I was going to pick one. And I think we need to be more open about it and say, this is how you get groundbreaking technology, by having this sector that sits underneath it. You may not like what it looks like sometimes, and sometimes, it's not great at positioning itself well. But this, for biotech, we have a faster route towards that because it's an exciting technology. It can do very groundbreaking things. It's manifested through amazing entrepreneurs. So I think we need to bring the two sides of the conversation together. You cannot have them separate.
It's a fair assessment. I'm sure we'll agree. Speaking of diagnosis, would it be fair to say that Europe's biotech is definitely not good enough yet at its storytelling game collectively? Too much of a silo effect here, or is it too judgmental, too strong?
Excuse me. I wanted also to touch one topic here, actually two, regarding the biotech industry and how it is in Poland. In my opinion, there's a huge gap between the academia and what is happening in the industry in real life. So people, they understand academia very well, but when it comes to the funding, they don't really understand the principles here. And I also think the idea of the good storytelling. So as you mentioned before regarding the whole COVID issue and things that were happening in the industry that everybody knew about, suddenly what virus is, what diseases are. This is not something that the public is interested on a daily basis, unless it's something that is based on fear and very, very advanced storytelling. So I think this is something that US does very well. They really well describe all the things they try to sell. They can really describe the story very well. And I think this is something that we yet get to learn, especially in the biotech field, since R&D, this is something that the countries develop usually when they have lots of money. When the economy is, for example, in recession, this is not the focus. But right now there is fear of military attack. This is also not in focus. So I think this is very tricky for biotech development in such a region when there is such a problem happening at this stage we are right now.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about perhaps CDMO capabilities, the key drivers behind it, how it is evolving. Does it have a threatened or sustainable status now? Any comments on that?
There's nobody from CDMO, actually.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I know. And some CDMOs are being spun off these days, as I hear.
It would be hard to answer very,
But you still have-
in a very
still have-
specific way. But yeah, in biotech, it's a backbone for the industry. So to be ready and elastic and agile to product, we need this infrastructure. We need to be smooth to change from one product to another. So yeah, definitely that's the area we should keep focus on and invest a lot.
Because this is essentially where science is translated into credibility,
exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the credibility.
Yeah, and it was said during this panel that it's okay. We challenge the, let's say, problem of funding the early stage phases of projects, but at the end of the day, there are some private money on the market, some grants around, but this translation moment from laboratory to let's say production phase, from my perspective, when I'm observing projects we are supporting, it is the biggest challenge right now. So such partners available locally, very flexible, very agile, are very important to make this translation between lab and industry.
Let me quote a few more statistics that I read in EuropaBio. sources. For instance, when adjusted for economic scale, venture capital availability in Europe is 8 times lower than in the United States. And then there's a question of implementation speed, which is a critical bottleneck area in your department. Another one was related to basic research innovations staying at basic research stage, effectively. Another one was experiencing a nearly 70% drop in life science investments since 2021. Quite an interesting statistic. Any of those you would like to comment on?
Maybe this, let's say, time for implementation, some legal acts. For example, STEP initiatives and STEP regulation came into force on 1st March 2024, and we are still waiting for opening instruments for support in many countries, including Poland, and it's expected to start, let's say, in a good case scenario in third quarter that year. So it's 1.5 years from implementing regulation at the European level to start some, let's say, final stage of this journey and start call for proposals. It's much too long. It's much too long. When we are, let's say, observing right now all this competitiveness act at the European level and these other documents inside these documents, we checked and it's around 70 initiatives, let's say, under the critical, under the competitiveness compass. So it takes like years, and will be like in 2030 or 2029 with some strategies and initiatives ready to be implemented, while the United States and China are going forward in a very, let's say, decent pace.
Thank you. We have like 7 minutes left, and I would definitely like to open up to the rest of the audience if there's anything you would like to ask, your question. Can we pass the mic to this gentleman here? Otherwise, I will use mine. Thank you so much. We are slowly and gradually getting to the summary phase of our conversation.
Thanks. French Łukasz, biotech. I was shocked at the beginning with your first topic.
Always good to be shocked at the beginning.
That Europe is losing market share in trials. So I'm shocked that you were shocked. And the question is why? So we have EU, which in my view is a loose association of states, 27 of them. Imagine how would we look like when we are 37, 47. It would be a total mess. On the other side of the pond, there is a country consisting of 50 states. Imagine that state having a regulation like we in the EU.
Forget regulations. Now it's all about executive orders.
No. So would you go to Wyoming, Montana, and so on? Because every country would have their own market regulator. You need a license. So this is coming back here, right? We have to change the EU, or the EU changes itself.
I'm sure we all agree, thank you, it's a very important question. I'm sure we all know it and agree. Just in order to solve this.
Can I answer?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think Europe knows that. So there are different initiatives to solve some of the issues. Of course, there's political decision needed, because not everybody wants more of the European Union. Some of the countries want actually less European Union, and this is the case. But things like EU CTR, that was a good idea 10 years ago, is not completely working. But JCA, which is the first step of the technology assessment, that should allow for the more unity in this respect. And I think what we just need more speed. We need to accelerate in that case. But we cannot. We still need to compare to China and to US, despite the fact that we are consisting of 27 countries. Two things I can give you examples from the clinical trials. There's one which is in oncology trials. There's IVDR, which making some delays in terms of the registration of the study, which uses the companion diagnostic, which is heavily used in oncology trials. The second thing is that when we make a decision on the clinical trial, whether it's approval or not, still 27 countries are getting involved. Why? We can still make it, although we have Lisbon Treaty and some competences are reserved to the member states, but in this respect, we can still make it so there's only one decision that is valid within the European Union. We don't need 27 countries. So things like this, they can come into force, and certainly they can change the entire landscape. I think we can believe that this is possible.
Anyone else would like to comment?
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good elephant in the room. In fact, that we always point the finger up at the EU level, but of course there are 27 different member states, and health is a member state competence. If you have multiple ethical committees in each region before a clinical trial to progress, it doesn't matter how good the EU legislation is. The member states have a really serious responsibility to address this as well and align how they can work together.
Speaking of an elephant in the room, it sounds to me like there's a whole herd of elephants in the European biotech room. So,
my name is Tomasz Rzesiński, and I would like to make actually one very simplistic comment. That
always welcome.
Starting from the end, we have solution in this room already. And I think the name is Magda. And Magda is not paying me for making this. But let's look at perspective of investor in Poland. Why to invest in biotechnology? This is very low odd game. Actually, odds are against us because the road is only to be sold or to be extremely successful with extremely low probability to go to this point. And let me share some experience from Asia. When in Asia, one industry is starting something, in area of city, you can find everything related to this industry. There is one street you can buy everything to put together radio. You can buy, there is street, everything for construction, and so on and so on. And I think Magda is kind of accelerator to build community. Because I think we need to build a community which is working together, and in every technology, if you are creating new breakthrough technology, you have on this way developments which are useful for other companies. And this is actually attractive for investor that not after 15 years, maybe this company will be successful with, again, very low probability, but in 3 years, we'll be able to serve local market with some solutions. We'll lower cost sharing equipment, maybe sharing some stuff, maybe sharing some know-how. And I think politicians are difficult, changing regulations are difficult, we have to work on this, but working together is something which is our hands. And again, to build not discussion community, but collaboration community. Strategic partnership, what Isanim was mentioned. Sorry, Salim.
Thank you so very much. It all does sound very promising. I'm sure anyone would like to comment? If not,
I can add that it's of course Magda, but other communities like this. So to jointly, let's say, create the communication and the statements to the politicians, to our community, to our stakeholders, and using the same words, using the same names, using the same, let's say, style, to make to volume up our voice.
Again, conclude. Maybe a small remark also to the gentleman. You know, in Poland, because there is a history of generic drug development, we all think that it's only a success when you bring a drug to approval. Well, this is not the case for biotech. if you bring a molecule into the clinic and you have proof of mechanism, you can do a big deal with big pharma. This is also an exit, and that doesn't take 50 years. You can do that in like 4 to 5 years, and that's a window where also venture capital might be interested in.
And I feel obliged to second everything that was just said. This is a great example. I mean, obviously we're not going to solve all of the problems from the European biotech sector here, but just this sort of exchange and forming these communities and strategic partnerships, there's so much magic that can come out of that. And the more we do these things, the more I'm actually optimistic, and especially combined with, you know, being a little more bold, being a little more pragmatic, creating the value while we go, because there's a lot of value that is being created while we go. We will continue to solve these issues into the future.
Can I just so one thing, we recognize that as a medical research agency, so we are a funding agency. So in our calls, we allowed for the project's development, and we did not require the implementation, market implementation. So moving on the TRL level is sufficient for us, because we understand the biotech needs in this context.
Ireneusz, if you had started your comment like 2 or 3 seconds earlier, you would have interrupted Salim, and that would have been a perfect revenge. But you missed the opportunity. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, from this discussion, roughly focusing on challenges, the industry is achieving a lot, so we can skip that part. If you were to give me just one word or a short phrase that is the biggest focus in your mind right now, because from this conversation I can see it's probably about silos. There is too much silo effect in the industry, which impacts the storytelling and communication and leverage and negotiating power and everything to do with all that, which effectively impacts the entire industry, so that you don't have the catalysts that you talk about, like COVID-19. What would be other words and other phrases, like single concepts, that you think will be the focus of the future discussion? Anyone?
Okay, so maybe I can say. So for myself, from my perspective, and from the perspective of what we do in the funding agency, this would be a tailored funds, public funds that are addressing the needs.
Essentially.
Of course, the other things are mutually important, but so like the regulations that we need to change. But I think this is only from this small perspective that I have.
Okay, fair enough.
I would say cooperation.
Cooperation.
From the helicopter view approach, I would say 2 words: hope and priority. So I hope that biotech will have finally top priority at the EU level.
Thank you. The last voice is with Salim and Claire.
You want to go first?
I would say speed. How do we make it go faster?
Okay, yeah. It's hard now to add anything.
The regulation.
So we need double speed, I suppose.
Yeah, double speeding. All of that, and I would choose collaboration and communication.
Thank you, Salim. Claire, Łukasz, Kamil, Ireneusz, Salim, it's been an absolute honor to have you with us today. Thank you so very much. And ladies and gentlemen, should you want to ask them questions directly during the next break, feel free to do so. Thank you again. Thank you so very much.